Why, as spectators, are we drawn towards violent cinema? Our brains are naturally hot-wired to imagine horrible things in our day-to-day lives. Our loved ones getting into accidents, our attempts at success ending in failure, being attacked at night by strangers. But are these fears somehow pleasurable for us? If not, why do we go out in search of these fears in works of fiction? Our prepotency for masked murderers, our love for true crime, the Shakespearean misfortunes of the literature we read, the end-of-days fear of a zombie apocalypse, or the blatant user-controlled violence of video games that allow you to murder the innocent if you so choose. As the literary scholar Jonathan Gottschall puts it, if fiction is an escape, it is a bizarre sort of escape. Our pleasure from violence can come in many forms. It can act as a buffer and a way to prepare us for the day-to-day fears of our lives. It can grant us the ability to experience the horrors of the world in a controlled environment. And most importantly, it fills our preternatural desire as humans for the consumption of violence. Funny Games opens with a picture-perfect upper-class family listening to operatic music while driving to their summer lake property. They feel bland and cold and talk almost in monotone. The world of privilege they live in feels detached from ours, and it is easy for us to be indifferent towards the fates that may fall upon them in the constructs of the thriller we are watching. The stage has been set, and our horror movie set pieces are in place. We have a family of 3 with a loyal dog, and 2 would-be home invaders. Our family have a few options for their possible salvation, including a set of golf clubs, a cell phone, a knife left on a boat, the aforementioned dog, who seems all too suspicious of our intruders, and a few dispersed neighbors at adjacent homes who could come to their possible aid. Quickly, however, these set pieces begin to be removed from the equation, one by one, as Peter, one of our home invaders, accidentally bumps our heroine Anne's phone into a sink full of soapy water, rendering it unusable, and the tension in the room begins to build as Anne becomes suspicious of the men currently in her home. As an audience, we are trained to understand that this tension is real, and our hearts begin to raise in both fear and excitement at the possible paths this energy could lead us to. Our second set piece, the golf clubs, is now in possession of the second intruder, Paul, and has become a weapon against the father figure George, and our patience has paid off as our desire for a violent thriller has started. Our third set piece, Lucky the dog, is also missing, and our attackers have turned the search for him into a game of hot and cold. Surely they could not have killed the dog, though. There are cardinal rules in the genre. One cannot simply kill an animal or a child. With one small smirk to the camera, done in full-on close-up, we are informed that we are taking part in the search for the dog as well. We know in our hearts the answer to the question being asked, but we choose to deny it until it's right in front of our faces. Peter breaks the fourth wall, while also taking a voyeur's point of view for the hunt for Lucky the dog, and we are shown our first truly repulsive moment as the carcass of the dog rolls out of the trunk of the family vehicle, laying limp and dead on the floor. We are jarred from our passivity, and we are reminded that we are consumers of the violence that is sure to come. Is this what we signed on for? Nothing about that was pleasurable or phantasmagoric, but the movie continues along nonetheless, and so do we as consumers of the film and of its violence. Just as we as an audience are hungry for violence, Paul is always shown eating and searching for food during the most tense moments. His hunger mimics our ravenous hunger for bodies. It also holds a mirror to those who are in a movie theater with their faces full of popcorn and candy, watching slasher films in death with gleeful excitement, like children receiving acknowledgement from their mothers. There is no driving motive for why Peter and Paul, if those are even their real names, are committing the acts we are watching. They don't need an answer, as it's not important. Our interest in these types of movies is not in the plot or backstory. It is in the presentation of death. We have become jaded and disgusted by the emptiness of our own existences and need a mindless release. And Anne, George, and Georgie are meant to be our sacrificial animals at the altar of our boredom. Michael Haneke challenges us to accept our part in wanting that release as Paul looks towards the camera and asks whose side we are on. We are confronted with our own position amongst the cruelty. We want to believe that we are on the side of the victims, but are we? It is true that within the context of the genre, we are made to sympathize with the victims, and we attempt to put ourselves in their position. But the movie can only exist with conflict, and the conflict is Peter and Paul. We are indifferent to the lives of our three protagonists until the climax. Our interest is solely with our intruders until then. There is a reason the average person can list the names of villains from classic horror movies, or the names of infamous mass murderers, but when asked to name a victim, they are unable to do so. We are in the business of dishing out suffering, not wanting to experience it firsthand, and our protagonists are simply vessels for that suffering until their climax. We do not want to feel or actually empathize with the pain of the victim, and it is hard not to be fascinated with the maturation of the killer. Violence is best served in grandiose fashions, so that we may remove ourselves from the burden of belief. But Haneke doesn't grant us our wish for over-the-top violence, but spares no expense when it comes to the suffering. Everything is shown off-screen and moves at a snail's pace. When Paul and Peter demand that Anne strip in front of them, to grant the audience their desire for nudity, yet another mandatory genre expectation, we are instead shown Anne's scared and fragile expression, and are made to reflect on the consequences of our desires to see nudity at such a time. We become outraged by the film, but is our outrage because the film feels too real, or that it is simply too boring and is not granting our wish for ultra-violence and nudity which has made us restless and impatient? We don't want to see the pain or aftermath of such horrors. We simply want mindless and detached sex and violence. The tropes of horror we have become so accustomed to have been subverted, and Peter and Paul are challenging us as an audience to question our moral reasons for wanting death. They are meant to be in the business of supplying us with pleasure and satiating our need for violence, but Haneke is unwilling to grant us our need for gratuity. Instead, he focuses on the emotional suffering. When violence is the payoff we so desperately want, Haneke must remove it in order to shock the audience into understanding and self-reflecting on their own morbid fascinations. Georgie is able to escape, only to be immediately found, and Haneke once again breaks the codes of horror cinema and kills Georgie off-screen while Paul constructs a sandwich in the kitchen with cold indifference. Our boredom or anger with the film running parallel in its indifference to what we have seen. Our murderous duo then leave Anne and George alone with their dead son for the audience to watch for an uncut 11 minutes as they sit in silence next to a blood-splattered television as NASCAR plays in the background. All the while the audience is left to watch as the parents grieve and mourn. We are forced to acknowledge that we are voyeurs to their suffering. We are nothing more than those who can watch the monotony of NASCAR desperately hoping for a crash. But have our tropes truly been shattered? We wanted to see the overly sexualized woman tortured, and the masculine figure rendered pathetic and cowardly in the face of adversity, and we received both. Our hands have been bloodied, but something feels off. We are also granted the scene of a heroic last surviving woman running down an empty road, but we need more. We've not had our climactic payoff. So Paul and Peter return and promise us that we will hear screams, and that we shouldn't fall asleep yet, because something fun is about to happen, as we are directly asked if we want more. And we do. We need our climax. And then we get it. Anne grabs a shotgun and shoots Peter in the chest, sending him flying across the room in gratuitous bloody fashion. We have received our payoff, a scene clearly designed to have the audience stand up from their seats and cheer with excitement as we are granted our catharsis. Our last woman standing has saved the day. But this is just another elaborate con by Haneke, as he constructs his most over-the-top fourth wall moment, as Paul reaches for a TV remote and pauses, then rewinds Funny Games the movie that we are currently watching, and removes the gun from the equation upon restarting it. Haneke is toying with his audience, reminding them that it is a movie that they have come to watch, and that there will be no big payoff. Our prayers, just like Anne's for a cathartic conclusion, are rendered useless. Paul and Peter have plot armor. They cannot die, because they are reflections of us, the viewer. Without Paul and Peter, the film has no purpose, and it is rendered boring and hollow. They are the movers of the story, so we receive our payoff to grant our momentary release, and we are returned to the world that Paul and Peter have created for us. And our final scene is of our three remaining characters floating away on a boat to a new vacation home of victims, our Chekhov's knife casually tossed overboard, and Anne shortly after also pushed off the boat, with little to no suspense or care, as Peter and Paul ruminate over the nature of violence and the notion of reality in cinema. Paul and Peter are just as much a part of the audience as us. The final close-up of Paul staring and smiling into the camera is no longer confrontational, but rather reflective, almost as if asking if we are still hungry for violence. And just like the noble penguin who marches alone towards the mountains, we are left alone to consider our role within the violence we have witnessed.